18 rifles do not correct themselves overnight. Colonel James Holloway's voice crossed the Red Mesa shooting range just as the morning wind lifted a ribbon of dust along the firing line. No one answered. 18 recruits stood behind 18 benches, each staring at a paper target hanging 300 yards away. The first grouping had been tight enough to cover with a quarter. So had the second, then the third. By the time the final shooter lowered his rifle, the easy confidence of the morning had disappeared. Sergeant Tyler Briggs walked from bench to bench, checking scopes, mounts, and serial numbers as though the explanation might be hidden beneath a loose screw. Nothing was loose. Every adjustment ring moved cleanly. Every inspection mark aligned. Every rifle had been returned to its assigned position with the sling folded in the same direction. Chief Warrant Officer Daniel Mercer studied the targets through a spotting scope, lowered it, then raised it again. In 30 years of maintaining weapons at military training facilities, he had seen excellent rifles, excellent shooters, and lucky mornings. He had never seen 18 separate rifles arrive at the same nearly flawless standard without a trained armor spending days on the rack. Holloway stepped onto the gravel behind him. Were these inspected yesterday? Mercer kept his eyes on the benches. They were inspected last week, sir. And 6 needed minor corrections. 4 drifting. 2 had mounts I planned to replace. Holloway looked toward Briggs, who had access after the range closed. Briggs hesitated. His expression changed as he remembered the woman with the broom, the faded work jacket, and the quiet way she had said one of the scopes was off. Nobody authorized, he replied. At the far end of the range, beyond the equipment shed, Hannah Reed pushed a wheelbarrow through the sand. She wore worn jeans, work boots, and a canvas jacket the color of dry earth. Her dark brown hair was tied low at the back of her neck. She did not look toward the firing line. She stopped beside a drainage trench, lifted a shovel, and began moving the sand that the night wind had piled against the fence. A gray Mustang mare watched her from the nearby corral, still as stone except for the slow turn of one ear. Private Lucas Grant noticed Hannah first. "Sergeant," he said carefully, "wasn't she here last night?" Briggs followed his gaze. Hannah worked without hurry, placing each shovelful exactly where it needed to go. Mercer turned from the targets and looked at her hands. Even from a distance, he could see the controlled economy in every movement. No wasted effort. No uncertainty. Holloway saw it too. "Bring me the security record," he said. Briggs swallowed. "Sir, she was only told to clean the range." Holloway looked again at the 18 targets, then at the quiet woman beside the corral. "Then somebody should explain why the cleanest thing she left behind was our standard. 10 hours earlier, the same range had looked ordinary beneath the late afternoon sun. Heat shimmered above the red dirt. Brass casings glinted between the firing lanes, and the last echoes of practice faded toward the low hills beyond Red Mesa. Hannah Reed was leading Cinderback from the Western Trail when Sergeant Tyler Briggs called her name from beside the equipment shed. The gray Mustang slowed before Hannah touched the lead rope. Cinder had never liked Briggs. He moved too quickly, spoke too loudly, and treated patience as a weakness. Hannah rested one hand against the mare's neck until the tension beneath the dusty coat softened. Briggs waited with a broom in one hand and a dented metal bucket in the other. 4 recruits stood nearby, cleaning their boots and trading jokes after the afternoon qualification. Private Lucas Grant was among them. He watched Hannah approach with the uncertain smile of someone who had not decided whether to join the laughter. Briggs held out the broom. "The maintenance crew is short today. Clean the shooting range before you leave." Hannah looked past him toward the benches. 18 rifles rested in lock support racks beneath the covered line. Some had already been wiped down. Others still carried a thin layer of dust from the morning wind. "I'm assigned to the stables," she said. Her voice was calm, neither challenging nor apologetic. Briggs smiled as if she had confirmed something amusing. "Tonight, you are assigned wherever I need you." One recruit laughed under his breath. Another glanced at Cinder and said the horse probably understood orders better than its handler. Hannah did not look at him. She took the broom from Briggs and examined the worn bristles. "Do you want the benches cleared as well?" "Everything," Briggs said. "Sweep the lanes, collect the brass, wipe the racks, and keep your hand away from the optics. Those scopes cost more than you make in a year. The recruits laughed more openly this time. Lucas did not. Hannah's eyes moved once across the firing line, measuring distance, position, and condition without appearing to study any of it. Then she tied Cinder near the corral fence, leaving enough slack for the mare to lower her head. Cinder remained facing the range. Hannah began at lane 18. She worked slowly, pushing sand and brass into clean rows before transferring them into the bucket. She never stepped across a firing position carelessly. She never bumped a bench. When she reached the first rifle rack, she paused. One rifle sat slightly forward from the others. Its sling had twisted beneath the stock, and a narrow inspection mark near the scope mount no longer formed a straight line. Hannah did not touch it. She leaned closer and listened as the evening wind moved through the covered structure. A faint metallic sound answered, too small for anyone else to notice. Briggs was already walking away with the recruits. Hannah raised her eyes. "Sergeant," she called. He turned, clearly surprised that she had spoken. "This rifle needs to be checked." Briggs looked at the weapon from 20 feet away. It was checked. "The mount has shifted." He laughed once and shook his head. "Sweep the floor, Hannah. Leave the rifles to people who know what they are doing." She held his gaze for one quiet second, then lowered her eyes to the broom. Behind her, Cinder stamped one hoof against the dirt. Hannah resumed cleaning, but from that moment on, she listened to every rifle she passed. The last of the recruits disappeared behind the administration building, but their laughter lingered in the warm evening air. Hannah continued sweeping without looking after them. She worked from lane 18 toward lane 1, collecting brass casings one row at a time, never hurrying and never missing a piece. Cinder remained tied near the corral fence, her gray coat silver where the lowering sun touched it. The mare had arrived at Red Mesa 6 months earlier after 3 trainers had called her difficult, unpredictable, and unsuitable for military exercises. She resisted the bit, refused narrow gaits, and backed away whenever someone raised a hand too quickly. Briggs had once joked that both the horse and the woman caring for her belonged somewhere quieter. Hannah had not answered then either. She had simply entered the corral without a rope, stood several feet away, and waited. Cinder had watched her for nearly an hour before taking one careful step forward. By the end of the week, the mare followed Hannah through every gate on the property. The men called it luck. They did not notice that Hannah never forced the animal to move. She watched the direction of Cinder's ears, the tightening along her shoulders, and the rhythm of her breathing. She responded before fear became resistance. Now, as Hannah moved closer to the rifle racks, Cinder lifted her head and gave a low breath through her nostrils. Hannah stopped. The range was quiet except for the scrape of sand beneath the broom and the ticking of cooling metal under the roof. She looked toward the mare. Cinder's ears were fixed on the rack. Hannah followed the line of her attention and saw the sling of a second rifle moving slightly in the wind. The motion was small, but the sound beneath it was wrong. A soft click, then another. Hannah set the broom against the bench and stepped closer without touching the weapon. The inspection mark near the mounting ring had shifted by less than the width of a pencil line. Most people would have seen nothing. Hannah saw a pattern. She checked the next rifle with her eyes only. The elevation dial sat one mark away from the record card attached to the rack. The rifle beside it showed a faint gap where the mount met the rail. She moved down the line. By lane 12, she had counted 4 irregularities. By lane 8, she had found 7. None were dramatic. None would make the rifles unusable. They were the kind of small changes that produced doubt at distance, the kind blamed on wind, posture, nerves, or an inexperienced shooter. Hannah stood still and listened again. The range seemed to speak in tiny mechanical warnings. Behind her, Cinder pulled once against the lead rope, not in panic, but in recognition of Hannah's growing tension. Hannah walked back to the mare and placed her palm against the side of Cinder's neck. The animal's breathing slowed beneath her hand. "Easy," Hannah whispered. The words seemed meant for both of them. Cinder lowered her head. Hannah looked toward the empty path where Briggs had gone, then back at the rifles. She understood what everyone at Red Mesa had missed about the Mustang. Cinder was not disobedient. She was alert. She remembered careless hands. Hannah knew that kind of memory. She untied the mare, led her to a sheltered post closer to the range, and secured the rope with a knot that could release quickly if needed. Then she returned to the first rack. She did not touch a single rifle. Not yet. Instead, she studied every mark, every angle, and every faint sound until the evening light began to fade and the list in her mind reached 18. By the time Hannah finished her silent inspection, the sun had dropped behind the western ridge and the range lights had begun to hum overhead. 18 rifles. 18 small inconsistencies. Some were barely visible. Others could only be heard when the wind moved across the racks at the right angle. Individually, each flaw might have been dismissed as normal where after transport and training. Together, they formed a pattern. Hannah crouched beside Lane 9 and studied the narrow steel rail beneath the scope. A pale line of dust had gathered along one edge, but not the other. The mount had shifted, not enough to alarm an inexperienced shooter at 100 yards. At 300 yards, the difference would become obvious. At greater distance, confidence would disappear before anyone understood why. Hannah straightened and walked toward the equipment shed. The door had been left unlocked for the cleaning crew. Inside, hand tools hung in painted outlines along the wall. Cleaning supplies filled the lower shelves, and inspection records rested on a clipboard beside the light switch. Hannah picked up the clipboard without removing any pages. The rifles had arrived at Red Mesa 11 days earlier after being transported nearly 800 miles from another training center. The receiving inspection showed no major damage. A second note recorded that the cases had been transferred during a dust storm. Hannah read the line twice. She could picture the cases being moved quickly, stacked too tightly, then lowered harder than anyone intended. A sudden impact would not leave an obvious mark. It would leave what she had just heard, a soft mechanical answer from metal under tension. She returned the clipboard exactly where she had found it. On the workbench sat a wooden box filled with worn cleaning cloths. Hannah lifted the lid and reached for one. Beneath the cloths lay a folded black patch, faded almost gray around the edges. A narrow serpent curled around a four-pointed star. Hannah froze. The room seemed to lose the sound of the overhead light. For one brief moment, she was somewhere else, beneath another roof, listening to wind push sand against metal walls while a radio voice repeated a call sign she had spent years trying not to hear. Northstar, check the line. Northstar, we move when you say it is ready. Her fingers stopped an inch above the patch. She did not touch it. She lowered the cloths carefully and closed the box. Outside, Cinder shifted near the post and gave a quiet call. The sound brought Hannah back to Red Mesa. She stepped into the cooling air and drew a slow breath. The range was empty. Briggs had dismissed her warning. The inspection sheet said the rifles were ready. Morning qualification was scheduled for 7. Hannah walked to lane 18 and placed one hand on the wooden bench, not the rifle. Her eyes followed the rack from one end to the other. She had learned long ago that equipment rarely failed without speaking first. Most people simply did not know how to listen. She pulled a small notebook from her jacket and wrote down each lane number, each visible shift, and each sound she had heard. When she finished, she closed the notebook and looked toward the administration building. One light still burned in Briggs's office. Hannah picked up the broom and began walking toward it. Hannah reached the administration building with the broom in one hand and her notebook in the other. Through the office window, Sergeant Tyler Briggs sat behind a metal desk, reviewing qualification sheets while a radio played softly beside him. Private Lucas Grant and 2 other recruits were still inside, waiting for their training assignments. Hannah knocked once on the open door. Briggs looked up, saw her, and leaned back in his chair. "Did you finish the range?" he asked. "Almost." She placed the notebook on the corner of his desk and opened it to the first page. 18 lane numbers were written in a straight column, each followed by a short observation. Briggs glanced down, but did not pick it up. "What is this?" "The rifles need inspection before morning qualification." One of the recruits shifted his weight. Lucas looked from Hannah to the notebook. Briggs smiled without humor. "You already mentioned one scope. There are 18 irregularities." The room became quiet. Hannah continued in the same measured tone. Several mounts shifted during transport. 2 adjustment dials do not match their inspection records. 1 support point is carrying uneven pressure. The changes are small, but they will affect consistency. Briggs closed the folder in front of him. You determined all of that while sweeping? I listened first. A recruit near the filing cabinet laughed. She listened to the rifles. Briggs allowed the laughter to continue for a moment. Then he stood, took the notebook, and walked outside with the group following behind him. Hannah led them back to lane 18. Cinder watched from the sheltered post. Her gray face turned toward the approaching voices. Hannah stopped beside the first rack. This one, she said. The forward mount shifted. Briggs inspected it from above, pressed the scope with his thumb, and shook his head. It is secure. Secure is not the same as. Align. His expression hardened. Do not lecture me about equipment. He moved to the next lane before Hannah could answer. She pointed out the second irregularity, then the third. Briggs gave each rifle the same quick inspection. He did not use a gauge. He did not check the recorded settings. He looked only for something obviously broken. They are fine, he said. Hannah opened her notebook again. The morning test is at 300 yards. A small shift will become visible there. Briggs turned so the recruit could hear him clearly. You work in the stables. You clean the range when assigned. You do not diagnose precision equipment. He lifted one rifle from the rack and held it toward her. Show me what you think is wrong. Hannah did not reach for it. Her eyes moved to the chamber, then to the scope mount, then back to Briggs. I was told not to touch the optics. Now you remember orders. The recruits laughed again, louder this time. Lucas did not join them. Hanamed Briggs. I remember every order. Something in her voice caused a smile to fade, but only for a second. He returned the rifle to the rack with a careless movement that made Hannah's jaw tighten. Finish cleaning, he said. Then go back to your horse. Briggs walked away with the others. Lucas remained behind for a moment, looking at the notebook in Hannah's hand. Are you sure? He asked quietly. Hannah looked down the line of rifles. Yes. Lucas glanced toward Briggs, then followed the group. When the building door closed behind them, the range fell silent again. Hannah stood beneath the white overhead lights while Cinder waited beyond the fence. At 7 in the morning, 18 recruits would trust those rifles. Hannah looked at the broom resting against the bench. Then she looked at the equipment shed. This time, she did not move toward the broom. For several seconds, Hannah remained motionless beneath the range lights. The equipment shed stood less than 30 feet away. The stable path waited in the opposite direction, pale beneath the rising moon. She could leave. She had reported the problem twice. She had written down every irregularity. She had followed the chain of responsibility as far as Sergeant Briggs allowed. No one could reasonably blame her if the rifles performed poorly in the morning. Cinder shifted beside the fence, and the leather lead rope made a soft sound against the post. Hannah walked to the mare and untied her. We should go, she said. Cinder took 3 steps toward the stable, then stopped. Her ears turned back toward the range. Hannah gave the rope a gentle pull. The Mustang did not resist, but she did not move either. She simply stood in the moonlight, listening. Hannah looked over her shoulder. A training schedule hung beside the administration door, its white paper moving slightly in the wind. She had passed it every morning for the last week without reading more than the date. Now, one line caught her attention. 7 o'clock. Precision qualification. 18 recruits. 300 yards. Hannah closed her eyes. For a moment, the clean desert air seemed filled with older sounds. Canvas snapping in hard wind. A radio signal fading beneath static. Someone checking a rifle case and saying there was no time to inspect it again. She opened her eyes before the memory could finish. Cinder was watching her. You remember careless hands too, Hannah whispered. The mare lowered her head. Hannah led her to the sheltered post closer to the equipment shed and secured the rope with a quick-release knot. Then she checked the clock above the administration entrance. 11:47. The base had settled into nighttime silence. Most windows were dark. A maintenance truck sat near the fuel station. Far beyond the fence, a freight train moved across the desert, its distant horns stretching through the cold air. Hannah walked to the equipment shed and switched on the single work light. The wooden box still rested on the bench. She did not open it. Instead, she removed the inspection clipboard from the wall and read the authorization section at the bottom. Only the armorer, range officer, or commanding officer could approve adjustments. Her name appeared nowhere. She set the clipboard down. The correct choice was clear. So was the necessary one. Hannah opened a steel cabinet and examined the tools without touching them. She found the torque gauge, the alignment level, the lens cloths, and the measurement cards. Everything was where a trained armorer would expect it to be. That told her Chief Warrant Officer Mercer maintained the shed carefully. It also meant he would recognize any careless work immediately. Hannah returned to the range and stood before Lane 18. She placed both hands on the bench and breathed slowly. Only what is needed, she said to herself. She inspected the rifle again, then checked the chamber and safety condition with practiced caution. Her movements were quiet, controlled, and exact. Cinder watched from beyond the fence. Hannah lifted the first rifle from the rack. The weight settled naturally into her hands, not like something unfamiliar, but like a language she had once promised never to speak again. She looked toward the dark administration building. No light came on. No door opened. Hannah carried the rifle to the workbench. At 11:52, she began. Hannah worked beneath the single white light while the rest of Red Mesa slept. She did not rush. Speed had never impressed her. Readiness did. The first rifle took 12 minutes. She checked its condition, compared the recorded settings, corrected the small shift, and returned it to the rack exactly as she had found it. Before moving on, she drew 3 short marks in her notebook. The second rifle required less time. The third carried dust beneath a mounting point that should have remained sealed. By midnight, 4 rifles were ready. By 1 in the morning, Hannah had completed 7. The air grew colder as the desert released the heat of the day. Wind moved through the covered firing line and carried the dry scent of sand, canvas, and machine oil. Beyond the fence, Cinder stood beneath the shelter with one rear leg relaxed. The Mustang appeared calm, but each time Hannah lifted another rifle from the rack, one gray ear turned toward the workbench. Hannah spoke to her occasionally, never louder than a whisper. "Still here?" Cinder answered with a slow breath. Hannah almost smiled. At lane 9, she found a rifle that had first caught her attention. She rested it on the padded surface and studied the faint separation along the mount. Her hands remained steady, but her breathing changed. A distant memory pressed against the edges of the room. Another workbench. Another night. A younger voice asking whether the equipment would hold through morning. Hannah had answered yes because everyone needed certainty, and because there had been no time left for anything else. She closed her eyes. The overhead light at Red Mesa hummed softly. Cinder shifted outside. Hannah opened her eyes and returned to the present. Only what is needed, she reminded herself. She corrected the alignment, verified the record, and placed the rifle back in its assigned position. At the corner of the rack, she added 3 tiny inspection marks in removable pencil, close enough together that most people would mistake them for an old maintenance notation. The marks were not decoration. They were a promise that someone had checked twice. At 2:30, Hannah paused to drink water. Her fingers felt stiff from the cold, so she held them around the metal cup until warmth returned. She did not sit. 12 rifles were ready. 6 remained. The final group showed the same story as the first. Minor shifts from travel, repeated use, and inspections performed too quickly. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that would draw attention until a shooter began doubting every result. Hannah understood that doubt could spread faster than any mechanical problem. One mispoint became a changed grip. A changed grip became hesitation. Soon the person blamed himself for a flaw that had begun in the equipment. At 4:15, she finished the 17th rifle. Dawn remained more than an hour away, but a thin gray line had appeared above the eastern hills. Hannah carried the last rifle to the bench. It was the one Briggs had lifted carelessly while the recruits laughed. She examined it in silence, then found the smallest shift of all. She corrected it, checked the record, and returned it to lane 1. 18 rifles now rested in a perfect line. Hannah cleaned the workbench, returned every tool, and erased every sign of her presence except the notebook entries and the 3 quiet marks near each rack. When she switched off the work light, the sudden darkness felt deep and complete. She walked to Cinder, untied the quick-release knot, and rested her forehead briefly against the mare's neck. "Ready," Hannah whispered. Cinder stepped forward without being asked. Together, they left the range before the first window at Red Mesa came alive. At 6:45, Red Mesa woke beneath a pale desert sky. The recruits gathered at the firing line with coffee still warm in paper cups and jackets zipped against the morning cold. Sergeant Tyler Briggs moved down the row, checking names against the qualification sheet and speaking with the confidence of a man who expected the day to unfold exactly as planned. Private Lucas Grant took lane 9. He remembered Hannah's warning from the night before, but the rifle in front of him looked no different from any other. The mount appeared secure. The inspection card remained clipped to the rack. Nothing suggested that someone had worked beneath the range lights while the base slept. Beyond the equipment shed, Hannah opened the stable gate and led Cinder into the morning sun. She had changed into a clean work jacket, but exhaustion softened the edges of her face. She had slept for less than an hour in a chair beside the tack room. No one noticed. To Briggs and the recruits, she was still the quiet woman assigned to horses and maintenance. Cinder walked beside her without a lead rope, matching every step. At 7, Briggs raised his hand and began the qualification. The first recruit settled behind his rifle and fired his opening group. Chief Warrant Officer Daniel Mercer watched through a spotting scope from the observation table. After the final shot, he studied the target longer than expected. "That is clean," he said. Briggs smiled. "Good training." The second recruit produced a group nearly as tight. Then the third did the same. By lane 5, Mercer had stopped complimenting the shooters. He began checking the weather meter, the ammunition lot, and the range log. The wind was steady at 4 miles per hour. The ammunition came from the same shipment used the previous week. Nothing explained the sudden consistency. Lucas took his position at lane 9. He remembered Hannah saying the mount had shifted. He placed his cheek against the stock, breathed slowly, and completed the course. When the target returned, 5 holes formed a cluster smaller than his palm. Lucas stared at it. The week before, his shots had spread twice that distance. He looked toward the stables. Hannah was brushing dust from Cinder's gray shoulder, her attention fixed on the mare. Lane 10 matched lane 9. Lane 11 matched lane 10. The morning grew quieter with every target. By the time the 18th recruit finished, even Briggs had stopped offering explanations. Mercer lowered the spotting scope and walked directly to the racks. He examined the first rifle, then the second. At lane 3, his fingers stopped near 3 tiny pencil marks beside the support point. He checked another rack. The same marks appeared there. Then another. 3 short lines, carefully placed, almost invisible beneath the edge of the metal. Mercer's posture changed. He no longer looked puzzled. He looked alert. "Sergeant Briggs," he called. In the qualification, Briggs turned sharply. "Sir, every rifle is performing better than standard." "I can see that." Mercer moved to lane 9 and found the same markings. His face lost color. "Secure the line and do not touch anything." The recruits stepped back. Lucas watched Mercer cross the gravel toward the stable path. Hannah continued brushing Cinder in slow, even strokes. The mare lifted her head before Mercer reached them. Hannah did not turn around. "You found the marks," she said. Mercer stopped several feet behind her. For a moment, he seemed unsure whether to address a stable worker or salute someone from memory he had never expected to see again. "Who taught you to leave 3 lines?" he asked. Hannah's hand became still against Cinder's coat. The Mustang leaned gently into her shoulder. Hannah looked toward the firing range, where 18 rifles rested beneath the morning light. "People who believed a second inspection could save a first mistake," she said. Mercer studied her profile. Then he spoke a name that had not appeared on an active roster in more than a decade. "Northstar." Hannah did not answer at once. The name remained between them, quiet and heavy, while the morning wind moved through Cinder's mane. Mercer watched her closely. He had seen surprise, fear, and denial in people confronted with old records. Hannah showed none of them. She simply rested one hand against the Mustang's neck until the mare settled. Behind Mercer, boots crossed the gravel. Sergeant Briggs approached with Colonel James Holloway, followed by Lucas and the other recruits. Holloway's expression was controlled, but his eyes moved from Mercer to Hannah with growing attention. "Chief, explain why you stopped the qualification," he said. Mercer turned toward him. "Because those rifles were not merely cleaned. They were corrected according to a field verification method that disappeared from regular training 12 years ago." Briggs looked toward Hannah. She adjusted restricted equipment without authorization. His voice carried less certainty than before. "That is the issue here." Mercer shook his head. "No, Sergeant. The issue is that 18 rifles arrived this morning in better condition than our own inspection team left them." Briggs stiffened. That still does not give her authority. Hannah finally turned from Cinder. Her face was tired, but her gaze remained steady. "I reported the problem twice." Lucas lowered his eyes. Holloway noticed. "Is that true?" Briggs hesitated. She made a general claim about alignment. "I gave him the lane numbers," Hannah said. "I gave him the recorded differences. I asked for inspection before the morning test." Holloway looked at Briggs. "And what did you do?" No one spoke. The silence answered before Briggs did. "I inspected them visually." Mercer's expression hardened. From several feet away, Briggs did not respond. Holloway stepped toward the first rack and examined the 3 pencil marks beside the support point. "You recognize these?" he asked Mercer. "Yes, sir. Black Viper 7 used them after every second inspection. 1 line for mechanical verification, 1 for recorded settings, 1 for the person who checked the first 2. A low murmur moved through the recruits. Most had heard the name, only in fragments, the kind repeated in training halls without dates or details. Holloway looked back at Hannah. Black Viper 7 was dissolved. "It was erased," Mercer said quietly. "That is different." Briggs gave a short, uneasy laugh. "You're saying the stable worker was part of a classified weapons unit because of 3 pencil marks?" Mercer walked to lane 9, opened the maintenance card, and compared Hannah's notes to the recorded settings. "I am saying she identified every error our inspection missed. I am saying she corrected 18 rifles without replacing a single part. I am saying this method was taught to fewer than 20 people." He closed the card. "And I am saying I heard the name Northstar once from the man who trained me." Holloway studied Hannah for a long moment. "Do you deny it?" Cinder shifted closer to her shoulder. Hannah looked past the colonel toward the targets hanging 300 yards away. "The name belonged to another life. But it was yours." Hannah's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Yes." The recruits fell completely silent. Lucas remembered the broom in her hand, the laughter in the office, and the way she had warned them without anger. Briggs looked as though the ground beneath him had changed. Holloway stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Why did you come to Red Mesa?" Hannah ran her hand once along Cinder's gray neck. "Because horses do not ask who you used to be." Mercer looked toward the Mustang, then back at the rifles. "And yet you still checked everyone." Hannah met his eyes. "Someone had to." Colonel Holloway dismissed the recruits and ordered Briggs to remain at the range. Then he asked Hannah and Mercer to follow him to the administration building. Cinder came with them as far as the stable gate and stopped there, watching Hannah disappear through the door. Inside Holloway's office, the blinds were lowered and the morning light fell in narrow lines across the floor. Mercer stood near the filing cabinet. Hannah remained by the door, as though she had no intention of staying longer than necessary. Holloway sat at his desk and entered a sequence into the secure terminal. The screen displayed a warning. Then another. Black Viper 7 did not appear in the ordinary archive. It existed only as a reference number linked to sealed records. Holloway requested command access. The system waited several seconds before opening a single page. Most of it had been removed. No photographs, no mission locations, no list of assignments. Only 7 names, 6 marked unavailable, and 1 marked status unknown. Hannah Reed, call sign Northstar. Technical role, precision systems specialist and field observer. Holloway read the line twice. Status unknown, he said quietly. They never confirmed where you went. Hannah looked toward the window. They knew. Mercer studied her. Then why leave the record open? Because closing it would have required questions. Holloway scrolled farther. A second document appeared, dated 12 years earlier. The text was brief. Equipment audit incomplete. Unit return not verified. Final field report sealed by executive order. At the bottom sat a symbol Holloway recognized from the patch in the equipment shed. A serpent curved around a four-pointed star. How did that patch get here? He asked. Mercer answered first. Red Mesa received several old storage crates from a decommissioned facility last winter. I did not know what was inside all of them. Hannah's expression changed for the first time. Not fear, recognition. The patch belonged to Sergeant Leah Morrison, she said. Mercer lowered his eyes. Holloway looked back at the 7 names. One of them was Leah Morrison. Your unit trained at the facility that sent those crates. For 6 weeks, Hannah replied. Before the last assignment. Holloway closed the document, but the screen kept the unit's symbol visible. Why were the 3 inspection marks important? Hannah took a slow breath. Because we worked where replacements did not arrive. If a scope shifted, we corrected it. If a record was wrong, we corrected that too. Every person checked another person's work. No pride, no assumptions. And the third line? Mercer asked, though his voice suggested he already knew. Hannah looked at him. The third line meant someone was willing to carry the responsibility. The office became silent. Outside, a horse moved against a wooden rail, and the soft sound reached them through the glass. Holloway leaned back. You carried that responsibility last night. Those recruits were going to trust the equipment, even after Briggs ignored you. Hannah's gaze settled on the sealed file. Responsibility does not disappear because respect does. Mercer looked down at his hands. Holloway turned the screen away from her and shut the file. The rifles explain your training, he said. They do not explain why Northstar vanished. Hannah opened the office door. Cinder stood beyond the stable gate, facing her. That is not a story you asked for, Hannah said. It is a story someone decides whether to survive twice. Hannah stepped outside before Holloway could answer. The morning had warmed, but the wind still carried a thin desert chill. Cinder waited at the gate, her gray coat bright beneath the sun. Hannah reached for the lead rope, then stopped when Mercer spoke behind her. Leah Morrison trained me once. Hannah did not turn. Mercer continued, quieter now. Not directly. She visited Fort Mason for 3 days and taught our class how to verify a system after transport. She said the first inspection finds the problem. The second inspection finds the mistake in the first. Hannah's fingers tightened around the rope. That sounds like Leah. Holloway joined them, but kept several feet of distance. He no longer carried himself like a commanding officer questioning a subordinate. He stood like a man waiting at the edge of someone else's memory. You do not have to tell us, he said. Hannah looked toward the western ridge. For a long moment, only the wind moved. Then she untied Cinder and began walking toward the empty training pasture. Mercer and Holloway followed. She did not invite them, but she did not ask them to leave. At the center of the pasture, Hannah stopped beside a weathered fence post. Cinder lowered her head to the dry grass. The last assignment was supposed to take 3 days, Hannah said. Observation, equipment verification, then withdrawal before the weather changed. Her voice remained steady, but each word arrived carefully, as if lifted from a place that resisted being opened. The storm came early. Sand covered the landmarks and interfered with every system we depended on. We had backup equipment, but one case had shifted during transport. Mercer understood before she explained. A mounting failure. Hannah nodded. Small enough to miss. Large enough to matter. She looked down at her hands. Leah found it before the first use. She corrected it and marked the rack with 3 lines. Then she made me check her work. Holloway said nothing. Hannah continued. The next day, another system drifted. We had been moving for hours. Everyone was tired. I inspected it once and said it was ready. Cinder raised her head and stepped closer to Hannah. Leah asked for a second check. I told her we did not have time. The words seemed to cost Hannah more than everything before them. She trusted me. Mercer's eyes lowered. Hannah ran her palm along Cinder's neck. The error was not dramatic. Nothing failed all at once. It simply created uncertainty when certainty mattered. We lost time correcting a problem that should have been found earlier. After that, every decision became harder. Holloway spoke gently. Was that why the unit did not return? No single mistake explains a lost unit, Hannah said. Weather, broken communication, bad information, delayed support. People prefer one cause because one cause is easier to forgive. Her gaze remained on the distant ridge. But I remember the part that belonged to me. Mercer took a slow breath. How many came back? Hannah's hand stopped on Cinder's mane. The mare stood perfectly still beside her. 1. The pasture seemed to widen around them. Holloway looked toward the administration building, where the sealed file reduced 7 lives to a few lines and 1 unresolved status. Hannah reached into her jacket and removed a small folded strip of black cloth. It was not the patch from the shed. This one was older, worn smooth at the edges. 3 faded pencil marks remained near the corner. Leah gave this to me before we separated, she said. She told me readiness was not about never making mistakes. It was about refusing to let pride hide them. Mercer looked at the cloth but did not reach for it. That is why you stayed last night. Hannah folded it again. That is why I always stay. By the time Hannah returned to the firing line, the recruits had gathered again behind the benches. No one was laughing now. Sergeant Briggs stood beside Lane 1 with his arms at his sides, the broom still resting against the wall where Hannah had left it the night before. Colonel Holloway and Chief Warrant Officer Mercer stopped several feet behind her. Cinder remained near the gate, watching from the edge of the range. Briggs looked at Hannah, then at the targets. I owe you an apology, he said. His voice was quieter than anyone had heard it that morning. I dismissed your warning. I treated your work as if it had no value. Hannah said nothing. Briggs continued, but there is something I still do not understand. Correcting equipment is one thing. Knowing how it will perform is another. Holloway stepped forward. That is enough, Sergeant. Hannah raised one hand slightly. It is all right. She walked to Lane 9 and looked down the line of rifles. Choose one. Briggs hesitated. Any rifle? Anyone you trust. He selected the rifle from Lane 1, the same one he had lifted carelessly the night before. He carried it to the bench and set it down. Hannah checked the range flag, then studied the dust moving along the ground. The wind had increased since morning, crossing the range from left to right. Mercer glanced at the weather meter. 6 miles per hour, he said. Hannah adjusted her position behind the bench without hurry. She did not pose. She did not look toward the recruits. Her attention narrowed to the rifle, the wind, and the paper target 300 yards away. For several seconds, the range became completely still. Then she fired once. The report moved across the desert and faded into the hills. Hannah waited. She fired a second time, then a third. No one spoke until Mercer checked the target through the spotting scope. His hand tightened around the scope body. Holloway stepped closer. What do you see? Mercer lowered the scope and looked at Briggs. 3 shots. 1 group. The target was brought forward. The 3 holes sat so close together that the recruits had to lean nearer to separate them. Briggs stared at the paper, then at Hannah. How long has it been? He asked. Since I fired at distance? Hannah looked toward Cinder. 12 years. Lucas Grant let out a slow breath. The other recruits remained silent, not because they had been ordered to, but because every easy judgment they had made about Hannah now seemed small. Briggs reached for the broom and held it for a moment. I handed you this because I thought it showed where you belonged. Hannah looked at the broom, then at the rifle. Work does not become small because someone else looks down on it. Briggs lowered his eyes. What should I do? Hannah stepped away from the bench. Check your equipment before the person beside you has to trust it. She turned to the recruits. And when someone warns you about a problem, listen before pride gives you an answer. Holloway looked at the tight group on the target. You could teach every person at this base. Hannah met his gaze. They already learned the first lesson. Briggs placed the broom back against the wall, but this time he did it carefully. Then he opened the maintenance log and began checking the first rifle himself. The following morning, Hannah arrived at the stable before sunrise and found Colonel Holloway waiting beside Cinder's stall. He held a folder beneath one arm, but he did not open it. "I can restore your rank," he said. "I can place you in charge of precision training and weapons readiness. No more maintenance assignments. No more people deciding what you know by looking at your jacket." Hannah opened the stall door. Cinder stepped forward and rested her gray muzzle near Hannah's shoulder. "That would change what they call me," Hannah said. "It would not change what I came here to do." Holloway looked toward the firing range, where lights were already glowing beneath the covered line. "You belong there." Hannah began brushing the dust from Cinder's coat in slow, even strokes. "For a long time, I believed belonging meant staying wherever people needed my skills. Then I learned that sometimes it means leaving before those skills become the only thing anyone can see." Holloway studied her, then lowered the folder. "Will you at least advise Mercer?" Hannah glanced toward the range. Sergeant Briggs and all 18 recruits had arrived nearly 30 minutes early. No one had ordered them to come. Each stood beside an assigned rifle with an inspection card, checking every entry before moving to the next step. Lucas worked beside Briggs, and when he noticed something uncertain, he asked instead of pretending to know. Briggs listened. Mercer moved quietly among them, offering guidance only when necessary. The range that had once filled with jokes now held the soft sounds of careful work. Metal touched padded benches. Pages turned. Pencil marks appeared beside verified entries. Hannah watched until Briggs reached lane 9. He paused, examined the mount a second time, then asked Lucas to confirm his reading. Only after Lucas agreed did Briggs add the third mark. "They do not need me standing over them," Hannah said. Holloway followed her gaze. "Maybe not, but they needed you here last night." Hannah returned her attention to Cinder. "Everyone needs someone to notice what pride overlooks." Holloway gave a small nod and placed the unopened folder on a wooden shelf. "The offer stays." He walked away without asking for an answer. Later that morning, Briggs came to the stable carrying Hannah's notebook. He had copied every entry into the official maintenance log. "I thought you might want this back," he said. Hannah accepted it. Tucked inside was a clean inspection card signed by all 18 recruits. At the bottom, beneath the final signature, Briggs had written one sentence. "Readiness is a responsibility shared before it becomes a consequence carried alone." Hannah closed the notebook. "Leah used to say something like that." Briggs looked toward Cinder. "Was she the one who taught you?" "She taught me to check again." Hannah placed the notebook in her jacket. Briggs nodded and returned to the range. As the sun rose over Red Mesa, Cinder stepped into the pasture beside Hannah, moving without a rope and without fear. Behind them, the recruits continued their inspection in silence. No ceremony marked the change. No announcement was made. Hannah had not raised her voice, reclaimed a title, or asked anyone to stand at attention. She had simply refused to let carelessness become someone else's burden. By doing so, she left behind something more lasting than a perfect group on a paper target. She raised the standard, and this time, everyone chose to meet it.